Hey, you want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money. All in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. And when you want to take your conversations with fans to the next level, Q&A and polls are the best way to get them talking. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. Best of all, it's totally free with no catch. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started today.
This episode is brought to you by Vital Farms. Isn't it bullshit to have to question where your food comes from? At Vital Farms, you can trace your pasture-raised eggs all the way back to the source, the pasture. On the side of each pasture-raised carton of eggs, you'll find the name of the farm where your eggs were laid. And when you look the farm up on their website, you'll get a peek at all the sunshine, fresh air, and open space the hens enjoy. Learn more and find out where to buy them at vitalfarms.com. Vital Farms, keeping it bullshit-free.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back for another episode of your favorite ag podcast, Ranching Reboot. This is episode 146, and I am your host, Brian Alexander. You can find me on social media as Red Hills Rancher. Ranching Reboot is the podcast that reboots your thinking about farming, ranching, food systems, and the people that operate them. Ranching Reboot is mostly fan-supported by all my amazing fans on Patreon.com and my subscribers on Spotify. I want to say a huge thank you to all my patrons and subscribers. You guys are the best, and I'm going to try to deliver even more value for you in 2024. If you would like to join the ranks of podcast supporters, there are plans starting at just $5 a month on Spotify and Patreon. If you really want to show some love, you can subscribe at higher levels on Patreon. If monthly subscriptions aren't your thing, you can send one-time donations through whatever platform you want. Just look for my Linktree link on any of my social media bios or click the links in the show notes. Something else to check out if you're on Spotify is the weekly Q&A and the polls. I try to do a new one every week. Sometimes they're about the overall podcast. Sometimes they're about the specific episode. So please be sure to check those out and let me know what you think. Now, next week is Christmas. So as longtime podcast fans, there's no episode that week. So let me explain how that got started real quick, just so y'all know. 2 years ago, when I was still a little less experienced podcaster, shall we say, I came up short due to poor planning on my part the week of Christmas. So instead of trying to do write a whole new show by myself or do a recap or do anything like that, I just kind of seized up and ended up not really having anything. So I just said, you know what? We'll take the week off. It's Christmas, so we'll just take the week off. Now you know how that got started. And since Christmas is literally next week, time is up to buy gifts. I mean, you got a couple days. That's about it. And I hate Christmas shopping, but my friends at Wild Ass Soap Company they've made it so easy this year. If you've got somebody in your life that's hard to buy for, soap. If you've got somebody in your life that has everything they could want, soap. If you got somebody in your life that smells a bit, you don't know how to tell them, soap. But also body booze and deodorant. Literally everyone I know uses soap at least once a day. All natural beef tallow and pork lard soap from Wild Ass Soap Company makes a great gift for anyone in your life, especially the ones that are hard to buy for. Check them out, wildasssoaps.com/reboot, and check out all the different soaps and body care products for all the hard to buy for folks in your life. While you're there, pick up some cold ass muscle gel to soothe those tight and sore muscles from all the ice that we're sure to have to deal with in a couple short weeks. There's CBD gummies. Those are kind of a go-to when you're having trouble falling asleep. So check those out too. That's wildasssoaps.com/reboot. And don't forget to use the coupon code REBOOT at checkout for an extra discount, or just click the link in the description. There's 2 really great educational opportunities coming up next January, and I've made arrangements to be at both of them. That's Soil Health U and No Till on the Plains. And no, they aren't really competition. It just takes many vehicles to get the message out. I haven't been to No Till on the Plains for a few years, but I'm looking forward to going back to see the world-renowned line of speakers like Jay Ferrier. No Till on the Plains takes place in Wichita, Kansas, January 22nd, 3rd, and 4th. Soil Health U is a 2-day event that teaches farmers and ranchers how to sustainably maximize profit from their land. The event is produced by the High Plains Journal and takes place at the Tony's Pizza Event Center in Salina, Kansas, January 17th and 18th. I'll be there to heckle my friends Mark Lording and Caleb Chapman on the custom grazing panel and heckle my buddy Matt Kincaid on day 2. My guest this week is somebody who's no stranger to fans of the podcast. Back for his 6th total appearance on the podcast is my good friend Hobbs Magaret. If y'all remember, about 2 weeks ago, I visited with my friends Josh and Gwen Hoy about their recent trip to Australia. Well, Hobbs took a little trip of his own down under, and he had a different experience. So let's get into it. Hobbs, my brother, good to have you back. How are you?
Awesome, man. How many times have we talked now? Aren't you getting tired of talking to me?
No, I never get tired of talking to you. I think this is probably podcast 3 or 4 with you. I don't know. I should have looked before.
It's got to be more than that. We've had like 3 or 4 individually, plus one with that lovely philosopher from New York, I believe.
Yep, my not cousin Tori Alexander.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Yeah, that was definitely an interesting conversation. I remember that. Yeah, everything's going well, man. Just finally getting my feet underneath me, getting back from Australia. That was the jet lag was real coming back. Kids up until 5 a.m. It was an adventure, that's for sure.
Oh, you took your family with you too, didn't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were fortunate for them to be able to come along, and so they did the whole tourist park thing while I worked. And so, I mean, I worked. I had a full itinerary the whole time I was there, man.
But we're going to hear, I want to hear some about it. Just a couple weeks ago, I talked to my friends Josh and Gwen Hoy, and they they were in Australia too. I think they were there just a little bit before you were. But they kind of went on a working vacation out to a 4.4 million acre station out in the outback.
Mm-hmm.
So if you guys haven't heard that one, go back and listen to it, because that's pretty wild. And that may shed some different light on today's discussion. And I didn't really plan to do like 2 Australia centric episodes kind of this close together, but that's just how it worked out. So I guess let's start with, why did you go?
I formed this really great relationship with a company over there called AgriProve. Basically, I cold called the CEO like 3 years ago. I mean, I've that from the beginning of this whole enterprise, I was like, you know what? Let's treat this as a carbon enterprise and not as a beef enterprise, and see how far that can take us. So I got to looking around like 3 years ago on LinkedIn and see like, what are the carbon companies that are actually making a difference out there? And AgriProve seemed to be making a name for themselves. And so I cold called Matthew Warnken, the CEO, and he picked up the phone. And so we just started a relationship. And then in the interim, this is when I was still in Oregon, in the interim, moved down to Texas, and he just happened to be in Houston one day and came to the ranch and saw what was going on. And then he came another 6 months later and saw how everything had changed, and got to see some of the cattle bunched super tight. And so we've just sort of formed this relationship. Ultimately, it's that the Australians, for a while, they thought the key to carbon sequestration was going to be multi-species planting. And the data that was coming back just wasn't supporting that they were getting the results that they wanted to see. So they kind of went back to the drawing board. And during that period was when Warnken was visiting me quite a lot. And the picture that I was able to paint, in terms of the whole ethos of Pleistocene megafauna, plus, what we're doing on the ground, really started to click for him. And he's like, okay, this, it's not multi-species planting. It's got to be grazing management. That's got to be the fundamental driver for carbon sequestration. Because my thesis that I'm operating from is that we live in a grazing ecology. The grazing is not just something that happens on top of the ecology that we can do with it. It's that it is the engine that makes the whole system move. Obviously, it's an academic ecologist would argue that it's a lot more nuanced than that. And yes, it is more nuanced than that. But that you take away grazing and the whole thing shuts down, as far as I'm concerned. Considering that the whole thing is run by grass, you take away grazing and the whole thing shuts down. So we became kind of like soul brothers under this whole Pleistocene savanna ethos. And so basically what I did was I spent 2 weeks over there helping build first principles to uh, give some directionality to the next couple of years of their business. So spent a lot of time in the office. I gave 4 or 5 presentations on basically the paleo history of grazing. I went out to quite a lot of properties, saw some cool folks out there, including a guy named Adam Rabjohns, who is another Jaime devotee out in Goulburn, New South Wales. So it was really cool to see how they were doing out there with nobody else around them had any grass, and they had beautiful tall stockpile everywhere. So it was really nice to see that it was working there. I was in Sydney for a while for 3 or 4 days, and I was in Albury, which is a regional community, which, by the way, is the closest regional town to where they shot Man from Snowy River. So I went to Corryong, Victoria, actually, and saw the Man from Snowy River monument, and so I satisfied my childhood dream. That's the Upper Murray River Valley. It's just one of the most beautiful places on the planet. And so spent some time there. Then we went to Brisbane, up in Queensland, and saw, quite a lot of properties up there. We drove 8 hours north up to Gladstone and the Coliseum area, where I gave some more presentations. I presented in downtown Sydney. I presented for Corporate Carbon, which is just basically an investment company in all of the various areas of carbon. And that was a cool relationship to establish. They own 2.2 million acres. So not 4, but 2.2. Those spreads are huge up there. And so those huge stations represent such a massive opportunity for the carbon game. Because I'm sure you know this, but for your listeners out there, the main difference between the Australian carbon game and the American carbon game is that the Australian one is regulated by the government, and the American one is voluntary.
Yeah.
So they're taking it a lot more seriously in Australia, and it's just once things get actually regulated, then you can start trading them in a different way, and with more, as I said, more seriousness. So it was just a great trip. I had a driver, which was great. It's definitely interesting, being the crazy person over here in the States for 5 years, and then suddenly you get to form this relationship and go in a place where your knowledge is valued and appreciated, and people can do something with it. Like, I've been giving out this information for free at parties for years now, and nobody really cares. But you finally in the right place, and then and it's valued. So that's definitely good for the soul to be in a place where people can appreciate what you're saying and can take something that you say and do something with it. So that was really fantastic. There's not a whole lot of difference really between the Australian grazing and the American grazing, from what I was able to see. It's just mostly set stalking, unadapted animals. With it's not to denigrate the Americans or the Australians too much, but it's basically the same. And I certainly realized during the trip that I need to put a trigger warning in all of my in my presentations, because anytime I got to the point about in my presentation where I talk about how in Pleistocene history the ruminants took the good stuff and the hindgut fermenters came behind to clean up the rest of it, and so the way that we replicate that is basically taking as much of the forage as we can with a really high harvest efficiency. I would get these audible gasps from the audience, like, "You take all the grass?" It's like I just walked into church and told them that there was no God. It was just definitely have to start putting a trigger warning on my presentations. That's how you trigger a regenerative rancher, by the way. I've discovered.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, Australia, as a continent didn't evolve with grazers. It didn't like it. It's a landscape unlike anything else on Earth because it didn't have grazers and ruminants on it before we brought cattle, pigs,
So
and
I
horses.
actually have been researching this, and I have a different perspective on that. I just want to add because I encountered this the whole time I was there. The uh, Australia had giant wombats.
Okay,
Giant wombats are hindgut fermenters, and it's the only marsupial that did seasonal migrations.
okay,
So also a kangaroo is not a ruminant, but it is a a foregut fermenter.
okay,
So it's similar to ruminant. And the giant short-faced kangaroo had a hoof.
okay,
So anything over like 100 kilograms or something, the tendons can't support just based on a pad. So they developed this hoof. So there were hooved animals that were foregut fermenters and hindgut fermenters that were on seasonal migrations. Obviously, not cattle or oryx or bison or any of that. But to me, the whole conversation is simply like we're fine. Maybe that's why, because they didn't have the grazers. Maybe that's why the soil is so questionable over there, over such a huge part of the landscape, because they didn't have those animals cycling. Obviously, I've been told that I'm not allowed to say this when I'm in Australia because it's because you have to like you can't say that we should change things or that maybe if ruminants or herd animals is a better technology for eco function, we have to leave it the way that it was. And um so that's definitely an interesting conversation that I had over and over and over while I was there. The whole Australia is different.
I mean, leaving it the way it was, I we don't know how it was in Australia. From what Josh and Gwen were telling me, the Aboriginal stories were that it was a paradise, it was an amazing place, and then all of a sudden there were white men and flies.
Yeah, well, when they got there, it was a fire sensitive environment, and then they started burning, and it's generally accepted that the Aboriginal community changed the over 40,000 years changed the environment from a fire sensitive environment to a fire resistant environment because of their use of burning. So it was a much less more grassy, much less shrubby um, environment, and they definitely altered the landscape over that period. And definitely one of the it was certainly a drier environment, and so I really got into reading a lot of papers while I was there because people would raise these questions. And in a more drought prone environment, the water holes are fewer and far between. So it's a lot more likely that the overkill hypothesis is applicable to Australia, because all the animals that the humans got there 50,000 years ago, and they just have to hang out at the water points. And then eventually animals would get thirsty enough, they would have to go to the water points, and then they just knock them out. So definitely the humans probably altered the ecosystem in Australia more thoroughly than much of the rest of the world.
That's interesting. That's interesting. And I think I have heard some of that. I'm just I guess the point that I was making is like it's a landscape with soils and life completely different than anything else than any other place on earth. And I was thinking back to how Josh and Gwen were describing some of the soil there and where they were, because I think they were kind of like really in the outback, like they were way out there. Like it sounded pretty intense just to get there. And maybe because they've had the lack of grazers, you know, because of how the continent developed and, maybe the Aboriginals killed off a lot of the ancient animals, they weren't there to build the topsoil
Right.
through cycling the biological matter through their guts and pooping and soil life. Did anybody talk about soil microbes or soil fungi down there?
I mean, to some degree, one guy made reference to the root sugars, which I assume he was. I asked him, "Are you mean mycorrhizal fungi?" Um, but yeah, it's that. I mean, to some degree, yeah. That I mean, they know they're advanced with regard to their you know soil biology. They're aware of it. The thing that really, to me, that I think that people are so concerned with, like, not changing things. There's like, Australia is special, it's different, and it's the oldest continent, so we have the oldest, most leached out soils. So we have this very delicate ecosystem, and where I'm, a bit of a bull in the china shop, where I'm always like, well, then let's get some herd effect on there. Let's get some carbon cycling. Let's get some manure. Let's get some urine. Let's get some animal impact. Let's get this thing going. It's like, oh well, you might disturb the moss, and I'm just like, well, life on Earth is an ever mutating, ever evolving uh, enterprise. So let's get on with it here, folks. Um, and it's not like, I mean, it's kind of a moot point anyway, 'cause it's not like cattle are going away, you know. They're not going away, they're there, and so let's use them to put as much carbon in the soil as we can. Let's see if we can, we wanna go to Mars and terraform Mars, let's start with Australia, let's terraform Australia first and, get that thing functioning. It's a huge, opportunity to draw down atmospheric carbon, put it in the soil, and create some, well-functioning ecology.
I was sitting here thinking about that, terraforming Australia. Most of Australia, like the interior, gets what, 4 inches of rain on average a year, but some
Right,
years they might go 5 years without getting rain and then get 20 inches in one year. Like
right.
that averages out to 5 inches a year. If we can terraform the outback with cows, that would be a good trial run to do it on Mars.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we'd have to figure out the whole atmosphere part, but, it's doable. And, I mean, grazing in domes, I think, is inevitable, in my opinion. I mean, we're probably not gonna create a better technology, um, to cycle, um, the plants that are gonna be necessary to get the soil biology going in those environments. I mean, it's a totally feasible thing in my mind. Within 100 years, considering how far we've come in the last 100 years, you're on Mars, you create a biodome, you have an artificially intelligence managed grazing regime with really highly genetically manipulated cattle. Which is probably going to happen. Um, Maybe even part biological, part mechanical cattle, you know. But the technology is too good. I mean, it's like, ultimately we have this beautiful set of genetics that makes up all life on Earth, and ultimately it's like it's almost as if Mother Earth is just sort of begging us to, you know, spread her seed far and wide to, it's like Earth is like a single cell organism, or we're trying to split into two, and so let's take this life form to another cell so we can, start reproduction of planetary systems. So I mean, yeah, I think that starting on environments that are difficult to graze in our on our current planet is exactly the way that we would get started. I mean, the around basically around the entire continent is arable land. So start there, work your way in, and then allow the powers of climate and weather and atmosphere to, you know, allow that water to just continue slowly working its way towards the interior. I mean, and one of the things that uh, that's very, very interesting is that people don't think in, it's sort of probably a new human. That's not new. I mean, people have been building cathedrals for a long time that take hundreds of years. So, if once we start thinking about the ecology and changing the ecology in 100, 200, 500 year periods, then there's no telling what all we can do. It seems to me like we could recreate Jurassic Park if we wanted to on this planet, with enough of a stable effort from humankind.
That's way too slow. We know it's got to be able to show results before the next election cycle.
Absolutely, because otherwise you're going to get voted out. Yeah, for sure. And there's a data collection I think is going to be really, really huge. And it is right now. I mean, one of the things that
what kind of data?
For instance, AgriProof just started working with series tags. I'm sure you're familiar with them.
Yep.
The satellite enabled tag. I met the CEO and their general manager when we were down there, and so they're going to be able to collect a lot of data about what the cows are doing. The question is, are we going to be able to develop proxy algorithms to tell us stuff? And are we going to be measuring the right thing? Because right now, the big thing that everybody's talking about is, well, you can put this tag on your cow and they can do, you can measure the feed conversion efficiency of the cow, how much they're actually eating in a day. And we know, this is one of the things that Zeitzman talks about a lot, is like, if you select for traditional feed conversion efficiency, you're actually selecting for poor performance on pasture, because it shows a higher efficiency score if you put on lean meat and water versus fat. And it's the fat ones that do well on pasture, the ones that are more likely to put on fatty meat than lean meat and water. So you end up with these late maturing, lean meat and water, large bone, large frame animals that show these great feed efficiency scores because it's 3 to 5 times less energy per kilogram of added beef. And they're like, oh, this one's way more efficient. And it's like, yeah, but then you throw them out on pasture and they fall apart. So what the question is, like, okay, we have all these tags and we're going to be able to collect all this data. What are we doing with the data? Are we bringing it up properly? Are we measuring it properly or applying it properly? And, by and large, we're not. That was one of the discussions I had with the CEO. It was just like, be careful about how you're measuring feed conversion efficiency, because you're creating less, you're creating less fertile animals by selecting for feed conversion efficiency. If you breed the cattle to feed them, then you're going to have to feed them to breed them, right?
Yep.
And that's one of the things that took me a while to really truly understand. And once I got it inside my head, I began to realize that it's you got to be really, really careful with. You can get all the data that you want, but how you break it down, that's really, really what matters.
I was just writing that down. If you breed them for feed, you have to feed them to breed. That's a pretty good quote. So the thing that I get really excited about when I start hearing about, series tags or 701X tags or grazing collars or whatever, is a grazing heat map.
Right.
Like, I don't need a piece of software to tell me that a cow is a more efficient converter in feed in a feedlot. I don't care. Like, that's going back down the road of single trait selection and EPDs where the industry already is. And that's a train wreck. And we know that's a train wreck.
Right.
Show me a grazing heat map. Show me which animals are spending more time on what forage. Now, where the correlation would get really, really tricky is getting accurate, timely data on what the forage composition is before and after those grazing events, so you can tell exactly what the animals ate. How we could figure that out, I don't know. Somebody pretty smart will say, oh, we can do it with a satellite near infrared or whatever. Just having a grazing heat map, to me, is very, very valuable data, because if you can correlate your grazing heat map based on what kind of plants are there, when they want to eat it during the time of the year, that's all going to be a lot more valuable information going down the road. I don't know what's going on with my camera. I keep flickering in and out. I've turned on lights. I don't know what's going on. Anyway,
all good. Well, I think the larger the degree to which you're selectively grazing, the more that information is going to be useful. I think that even grouped up super tight the way that I graze, you're still going to see some variability within one break on where they're hanging out. which area is getting the most amount of steps. And what's really interesting to me is once you take all of that data and then you then you basically validate it with on the ground carbon numbers, and so you can say, all right, well, here we had a real increase in the amount of carbon sequestration. You go back and you look at the tag data. Well, what was happening here? And then you also incorporate the satellite data. It's like, well, how much forage did they take? How long were they on there? What was the rest period beforehand? You put all of those pieces together and you shove it through machine learning, and you start to be able to really figure out what's the most effective way to put that carbon in the soil. And because we know that, and it's not just putting carbon in the soil is a good thing, although it's kind of the root thing.
Right.
The more carbon in the soil, the more forage, the more cattle, the more money. It just becomes this virtuous cycle that runs onto each other. So
But
I think there's going to be a lot of exciting stuff that comes out of it.
But if we're just chasing carbon, there's a danger that that's going to lead us down the same kind of road that feed conversion efficiency has led us down in bovine genetics. I mean, we understand soil carbon sequestration. We understand it in our context from our paradigm. And it's strange because there's people that seem to think we can suck it out of the air and inject it in rocks 5,000 feet below the surface. Yes, you're technically taking atmospheric carbon dioxide and sequestering it deep in the ground. But is that carbon that needed to stay in the atmosphere? And also, those mechanical capture plants use a ridiculous amount of energy to do that. I mean, they come with a pretty steep cost.
Mm.
But those are the technologies that government chooses to subsidize and chooses to chase. At least our government chooses to chase. That's where they're directing all the tax subsidies. Like, they have a tax subsidy of $145 a ton for direct air capture.
Yeah, well, there are definitely companies out there taking advantage of that. That's for sure.
So let's circle back and talk about the differences between the way carbon programs in Australia are working, since they're government mandated, and in the U.S. voluntary market, how you understand it.
Right. One thing I did want to mention real quick, I think it's kind of an important side note, is that I think the difference between chasing the reductive danger of single trait chasing in genetics and carbon is that everything is a derivative of carbon to a certain degree. And if you and the key really, and this is basically a new thesis that I've been thinking about, is that the only proper way to think of a herd of cattle is as a physics system. And the goal of thinking of it, the management goal, is to reduce the amount of entropy. Like for example, if you have an open cow a year, you have allowed a lot of forage to go through that cow with no collected organization. And the collected organization, of course, is a calf. And then you have caught that energy, you have transformed it into a form that is going to be able to last and reduce entropy. And so the only way, the successful systems in physics are ones that the most long-lasting ones are the ones that are able to reduce the amount of entropy. And the amount of carbon that goes into the soil and stays in the soil is the foundation of a system that has resisted entropy the most effectively. And the more forage that comes, the more photons that become grass and then become actually leaf and then stay for the longest period, that's resisting entropy. Then you're building the soil carbon, and then you have the largest herd possible that's the most fertile, so you're not having wasted days of open cows. That's resisting entropy. And so in my mind, the most effective way to think about how to have and if you have if you're able to control the energy so effectively that entropy is resisted, that's going to produce more profit. It's just, it is physics. Every system is a dissipative physics system, and a herd of cows is exactly the same. The more we can reduce the amount of entropy that is lost, disorganized energy that goes off into other parts of the system, the more profitable that we're going to be. And while I think that there is a possibility of getting way too entranced in sequestering carbon, that if we look at the whole dissipative system effectively and really effectively capture that energy as it goes from one trophic level to another, then I think that that's the way that we need to be thinking about the ecology in particular. And I'll tell you what actually got me thinking about this. Jaime talks about leaf to stem ratio.
Okay.
Johan talks about meat to bone ratio. Like, to me, that's the same thing. And what it is effectively capturing and storing energy in your trophic level. Like, if you have a higher leaf to stem, you're more effectively capturing leaf and turning that into something that they're capturing photons, and then you're more effectively turning that into something that captures more photons. So it's a great organizing feature, and it captures energy very effectively for that trophic level. And then a meat to bone ratio in a cow, you've also captured the energy of the forage in the next trophic level into an energy store. You don't store energy in bone, you store energy in meat and fat. And so to me, it's like, okay, I got one mentor talking about leaf to stem ratio. I got one mentor talking about meat to bone ratio. Clearly, there are some underlying principles that join those two things together. And the more and more I thought about it, the more I realized those are both examples of preventing unnecessary entropy. And so if you think about the herd and the ecology as a system that is trying to reduce the amount of entropy happening, then you have a more effective program. And so I started looking into that and looking at papers, and there's a literature out there that talks about the entropy, ecological entropy, and it's really difficult to quantify, as you might imagine. But that's given me a new paradigm to kind of think about what's actually happening here with regard to the whole. So yeah, thanks for letting me interject on that. I guess we can go to the carbon programs now.
No, that was great. And I'll have to think about that for a while. I'll have to roll that one around and ruminate on it.
Yeah, that's definitely a tell me what you think about this kind of thing, and we can go over it on the next conversation.
Yeah, for sure. So, everybody knows that I'm not a fan of government mandated things, no matter what they are, or more regulation, more 3-letter, 4-letter agencies created by government. Not a fan of that. So let's talk about carbon programs. We don't have one here in the United States. We've got the Title 45 sections in the Inflation Reduction Act that lay out some pretty generous tax subsidies. I don't think anybody's really sure how to get them yet. So how are they doing it down in Australia?
Oh, I didn't really dig in too much into the whole regulatory structure, but I mean, ultimately, it's you apply for these programs. They do a baseline that's done with an accepted methodology. Then you come back and look at it several years later, and you have an audit basically on how you've been running your operation. And which, by the way, if you have your animals tagged up, it makes that audit a lot easier because all that data is just easily accessible to you. And then you get paid. I have mixed feelings about it as well. I mean, going to Australia is a very interesting exercise in seeing how another culture interacts with government. Like, you may remember that, like, I learned when I was there that the police can pull you over and give you a drug or alcohol test for no reason whatsoever, period, anytime they want. Like, you can have done absolutely nothing wrong, but they can just pull you over, and as an American, I'm just like, "Are you kidding me?" Like, that's that is the most. I mean, but they are a lot more into the collective there than we are. I read in a book, Shorter History of Australia, that partly it's because all of the, go get it yourself people got on the boat to the United States because you had to pay to get on that boat. The free boat was the one to go to Australia, where they paid for your your passage over there. And
Or they
so
sent you there because you were in prison.
that was definitely the beginning, certainly. But then once they started realizing they needed to populate it, you could go to the docks in London, and you could either pay to get on the boat to the US, or that, you could, for free, you could go to Australia. And so certainly there was a more communal aspect. And while I was there, I learned about something called tall poppy syndrome. Have you heard of this?
No.
It's nobody sticks their head out too high, because that's the poppy that gets picked. So they're very much like, don't stand out from the crowd. Don't, make too big of a deal of yourself. Just try to blend in. And that's very much representative of the culture over there. And I noticed that quite a lot. And so, being the bombastic Americans that we are, we're always trying to stand out and trying to make a name for ourselves. And you gotta have to tone that back a little bit when you're over there. It's kind of an anathema to the Australian sensibility. And so I think that probably goes into the carbon game, because they're like, well, this is for the whole community. We want to make sure that we are finding a way to reward farmers and ranchers who are stewarding the land and taking care of it in a way that is quantifiable, justifiable. In a sense, it's like, every farmer or every rancher out there will say, well, I'm a steward of the land. And then this sort of government regulation, this carbon regulation, is kind of saying, okay, well, prove it, you know? So I think that accountability is something that they're a lot more comfortable with over in Australia, where in the United States, they're like, how about you leave me the fuck alone, and instead. And so for me, the opportunity as a grazier who's focused very, very intently on carbon is certainly over there. I'm not sure that I would want to live there because of the nanny state aspect, but that's where the opportunity is right now. And I think that to some degree, we'll have to see how things change in the United States, but to some degree, the Australians know that if it's not happening in the United States, it's not happening. And so they want to get into the programs over here. Their AgriProve is expanding into their engaging with the B carbon program over here in the United States. And so they would like to get into the American industry, and being that they have got their methods and their systems and their mechanisms really figured out, because they have to follow basically government regulations over there. They may have a competitive advantage in deploying carbon programs over here as well. And ultimately, it just comes down to the idea that, for me, it's just the fundamental idea that farmers and ranchers should be paid to steward natural resources. I mean, that should be. I mean, if we really give a shit about our planet and the future of our home, and I'm not talking about climate, I'm not talking about anything like that. I'm talking about having a functioning ecology. If we give a shit about that, then we should be rewarding the people who create better functioning ecologies for doing that. Seems like a good idea to me, anyway.
Okay. And admittedly, it sounds simple.
Yeah, it doesn't everything.
Yeah. But then when you start zooming out to the 30,000-foot view, or the governmental systems view, governance of resources on a large scale is extremely problematic. And to that end, we probably shouldn't do it. We should probably return to local control of resources because the people that are, kind of bought into that community and where those resources are located at are generally the best ones to determine how it might be used and used and be able to be perpetuated. I don't have a word right now, but able to be there for future generations, right?
Mhm.
When you have central planning and things are more centralized, you don't necessarily have that because people are chasing profit overall. So the question of who decides what resources need to be conserved or what actually is a natural resource. We've been talking about Australia and how it's such a manipulated landscape. We can talk about, the Great Plains on how it's a manipulated landscape. Every landscape on Earth to some degree is experiencing a lot of manipulation due to human influence, whether we're farming it, cutting down the Amazon, burning it, digging it up for lithium mines, whatever. We're affecting a lot of it just by what we do. But the problem of who gets to decide what resources are saved and what are not, it's a pretty easy thing to do on our ranches, right? But we know that there's still compromises that have to be made. Sometimes you got to break, you can't make an omelet without breaking an egg. So,
Right. I mean, to me, that's why the long term look for carbon, I think, is important, and that's why they want to monitor, but in 5-year spans and not just every year and penalize you or reward you every year. And I think that to some degree that's why I like the idea of the ecology as a derivative of carbon itself, because um, if you are, um, hang on one second, I got to blow my nose.
no worries.
Much better.
We'll just,
If you are putting more carbon in the ground, you're going to be more profitable.
I agree.
And so, so that's the ultimate benefit, is that it drives profitability. And that's why I think that it's important to have those two, or at least two, revenue streams from ranching, with your beef and your natural resources, because the increase in natural resources, or the increase in, say, soil carbon, is going to increase the amount of beef or calves that you can sell. And so, in a sense, it's not the government deciding what you need to do. It's your own self-interest deciding that maybe it's a good idea to do that. And if you don't want to do it, you don't have to. You can make less money, and certainly you get into, well, what infrastructure do I have to put in to make this happen? Can I do it with the cash flow constraints that I have right now? Do I have to do it over a 5-year period? Do I have to do it over a 10-year period? But I think we can all agree that over the long term, if we can find a way to put in the infrastructure that's going to allow us to grow more grass and have more cattle, then that's generally a profitable thing. It just so happens that carbon is sort of the fundamental first principle metric that if you had to pick one metric that was, um, say, a proxy for overall ecosystem health on your operation, I think carbon would be a pretty good one if you zoomed out and looked at a long enough time horizon. If you baseline a ranch and you do it every 5 years, and 20 years later you have a 1% increase in organic matter every 5 years, and you go from 1% to 5%, you can pretty much determine that they're doing better than they were. They're making more money. They have way more grass. They have, inevitably, they have more cattle to keep that really that beautifully evolving landscape functioning and on an upward trajectory. So certainly, I think that that's one of the protective mechanisms for me. Instead of the government saying you have to do this with your carbon, it's like, well, you don't have to tell me, because I'm going to make more money if I do that. So, um, and if I don't, and if I have to as you said, if I have to make an omelet and break an egg this year and I have to sacrifice this pasture or I have to overgraze this pasture, then, well, there's always next year. And that's why we're going to measure in 5-year increment. But ultimately, I really want to see ranchers and farmers get paid for putting carbon in the soil, because more carbon in the soil is more life and then more health and more regulated climate. It's more regulated ecology. It's just a better overall situation. Everybody, if you went and asked any farmer or ranchers like, hey, I can magically increase your soil organic carbon by 1% in the next 2 years. You don't have to do anything. How many of them would say, "Oh yeah, go for it"? All of them, you know. And they would say that because they know that they'll have a healthier landscape.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think once people understand what the benefits are of transitioning to a more regenerative grazing system or cropping system or whatever, soil carbon, the microbes, moisture infiltration. But what do you think is holding people back? Do you think it's just because we are a nation of tenant farmers and ranchers and there's just a lot of people on sharecroppers or cash rent that can't afford to do anything else? Is it because there's no owner operators left? What what do you think?
I think that's a very multivariate answer. I think all of the above, everything that you just said, definitely plays into it. And I think that that this conversation has been had a million times. Like, why aren't people adopting more regenerative practices? Like, the momentum of heritage is very strong. People really love their horses. They don't have the cash flow to be able to do it. They don't understand why it's important. They would have to alter the habits of their lives in order to do that. And I think it to me, I think that's probably maybe fear of success also. It's like, you if you succeed, it brings a whole, shit ton of problems. It's like, suddenly, okay, we have enough money to put in this infrastructure. Oh my gosh, I have to double my herd size because I have all this extra grass because I'm utilizing it so much more efficiently. Like, what am I'm gonna go to the bank and get another loan for twice as many cows now? Or like, am I gonna custom graze? It adds this whole level of uh, uh, of responsibility to what I'm doing, and so I have to learn a new thing. I have to make all of these new connections. I have to, I have to. But but it's so much easier to just continue doing the same thing you did year after year. I think that the vast majority of people don't want to move outside of their comfort zone when it comes to their habits. I think that's probably the biggest motivator of human beings altogether, is that we don't like to move out of our habits. We could all easily say, make a list of the things that are habits that are not serving us, and then all of us could do that easily. And then, but the number of people who can make that list and then act on it is very, very small. You know,
I listen to you think. I was just thinking, people will sit in their comfort zone like it's a house burning down around them just so they don't have to leave.
and I think that's well said. Yeah, I do. It's and all. Yeah, I mean, success is on the other side of discomfort for sure. Uh, Success is also on the other side of cringe. People like, oh, I don't want to go to the bar and tell my buddies that I was just moving cows with electric fence today. I didn't get to rope. I didn't get to rope nothing. Um, I didn't get to spend all my time getting ready for this with this horse to go to the futurity. Um, which is way more machismo. And so nobody wants to be that cringy dude who's just moving their cows with electric fence. And I think that's an American West thing, much more than an American East thing. People are, and I think it's the overall ranch ethos. They don't have ranches in Australia, right? It's all farms. It's either stations or farms. And it's the same thing. That was a really interesting thing. It's like America with no Spanish influence and very little continental European influence is what Australia is. It's basically just another version of Britain in a way. So I didn't realize how much Spanish influence was in my life growing up in the Texas Panhandle until I went to Australia and saw what it was, just zero Spanish influence. These are like British 2.0, you know, and,
It's
uh,
hard to find good tacos in Australia.
oh, dude, there's plenty of other good food though. I have to get, I didn't go searching out the Mexican food, that's for sure. Um, but the American East is much more of that European British sensibility. And I know Spain is in Europe, but it's definitely its own kind of animal. And so, farms, when people would ask me about the definitions of farms versus ranches over in the United States, I was like, well, if you're in the East, you can be a farmer and have crops and cattle. Then you go to the West, you're either a rancher or a farmer, and never the twain shall they meet. And then that's your identity. You're either a rancher or you're a farmer. Maybe some farmers do a little cattle, maybe some ranchers do a little bit of cropping, but it's not the same. It is not an integrated system. And back to your original query, I think that it's ultimately our habits and our identities uh, are certainly what prevent us. And I have the luxury of having a traumatic enough childhood that I wasn't able to form a proper identity, and so I've been able to just be a chameleon my whole life, and because I didn't, I moved around so much and had such an unstable childhood that I did, I never was like, this is who you are, I never got that. So I can just be whoever I want. So luckily I can be that guy who just, moves around cattle with electric fence and doesn't have to have anything else attached to my identity.
Black hoodie and brown pants.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. It's a little bit of Dr. Alexander, clinical psychologist action going on here. You got the beard for it.
Yeah, you're working on it. Mine's a little lighter, get a little more salt than mine, but that's what happens when you get old. So here's a wild thought.
All right.
Did the West really exist? Or is it a Mandela effect from media, TV, newspapers, and books, movies? Did it really exist? Did this idealized thing that a lot of us have in our heads of what the West was like with cowboys and Indians and stockmanship and rodeo is that a Mandela effect from TV and movies?
I think so. I think the American West was huge pieces of land owned by corporate interests in Chicago, New York, and Edinburgh, and the rich guys played with land, and they allowed poor suckers who were getting by on shit wages to take all of the romance, And I think that obviously there were all kinds of cowboys and stories and Wild West things. I wasn't there, so I can't confirm it personally. But if you're asking, was it overhyped and over romanticized, and was it actually probably really shitty for a huge percentage of the people who lived out of the American West? Like, yeah, absolutely. Life didn't get good for anybody until like the 1950s. You know, Uh, bef- Before then, it was pretty much shitty for everybody. And if like imagine you didn't if you were out on the range in Nevada in 1915, you weren't brushing your teeth. You know, it's like it was not that fun of a life. It was hard. I mean, I can't imagine getting a toothache out there. You throw out your back. I'm 37. I'm starting to have like back problems already, and I live in a pretty cushy, 21st century existence. Like I can't imagine these poor guys having problems with and nothing to salve their pain except like whiskey. You know, it's like life was hard. Was
Go
it a
chew on some
Mandela?
willow bark.
What now?
Go chew on some willow bark.
Right. Some proto acetaminophen.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Yeah, that's. I'm sure they had all kinds of native uh, and more naturopathic ways, but obviously those are not going to be as effective as Tylenol. That's for sure. But to the heart of your question, which is, did it actually exist, or was it completely made up because we live in a quantum universe that can change on just because of our decision to observe it? Like, I don't know, man. It's a good question. I'm not even sure that anything I'm not looking at exists outside of my observation. You look up at an airplane and it's like, are there people in that airplane? Are they like having their own experience right now at the same time? Like, I don't know.
Well, I mean, we could kind of continue down this line and say that we're all living in our own individual simulations, and I'm the main character in mine, and you're just an NPC.
Yeah, I mean, it's totally reasonable. The problem though is that if we act like that, it causes real problem. If we start acting like all of the people that we encounter on a day to day aren't real people, they don't like that very much.
No, they don't.
So whether it's true or not, we all have to continue pretending that all of the other people we encounter are real. As much as some of the people are like, "There's no way that you are a real person." But
It-
but then this like this it's crazy, dude. The way that interacting with reality is crazy. I'll tell you this. I made a hypnosis script on ChatGPT a year ago that said I was going to go to Australia and get paid really well to consult, and I had this whole thing laid out, just the way it felt to get off the airplane, everything. And boom, a year later, it happened. Like in that period, in that year-long period, I listened to this hypnosis script every day. And in that year-long period, this relationship with AgriProof grew. And then this necessity to go over there and start to do some business development with them grew. And it's like, is that just because I started looking for those opportunities and developing them? Or did I actually shift the fabric of reality by listening to a hypnosis script that I made every day? And I mean, I'm convinced now that I can have whatever I want. All I have to do is create a script and then listen to it every day. I can have whatever I want, and then you can just, the uh, the fabric of reality will just shift around, and you can have whatever it is you want.
okay, interesting. So, manifesting luck is what I wrote down,
Manifesting luck.
and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I want to define luck as the residue of preparation.
Mm. It's like
And
making a net.
what that means in relation to what you just said, I really don't know. But
I don't know, man. I think it's almost like there are infinite number of universes, and you just step into the one where that thing that you want is happening. You know, it's like I can't explain it. I think that Hinduism and Tibetan Buddhism have talked about it for a long time. I think quantum physics is getting there right now. There's a book out there called The Dancing Wooly Masters. I read it probably over a decade ago. Talks about this. The connections between Eastern philosophy and mysticism and the current understandings of quantum mechanics. It's like this clearly is a video game that we're in right now. Like we're on a spinning rock, the hurtling through infinite nothingness, and we're in these primate bodies, and we have these little hands that we can, like, the whole thing is an opium dream. Like, the whole thing is an opium dream, and you just get to kind of go into the back, the back code of the dream and say, okay, I want to experience this. I want to experience this. And then you just program yourself to then go experience it. And that seems to be how it happened. How in the world do you think I started with 11 cows 5 years ago and I just got back from consulting in Australia? Like, that doesn't make any sense, Brian. Doesn't make any sense from the perspective of the mechanical reality that we are all told about. It's like you can create anything that you want in this crazy dream of a reality, and all you have to do is believe it, that it's already here and it's already happening, and then voila, it just happens.
believe it's here before it arrives and have
Totally.
that it'll come.
Yeah, absolutely.
And hold that consistent vision of what you want the future to be, no matter
Yeah.
what it is, whether it's doing your consulting trip to Australia, having a ranch without cedar trees on it. I mean, I agree. Like, I know it sounds woo woo, and there's probably a bunch of people out there that are rolling their eyes. Maybe a lot of clicks turn it off or going to the next podcast. Whatever, that's fine. There's something there, and I'm not saying that, you know, by reciting a mantra that, I'm going to be the world's richest person, that's going to happen in a year. Got to be maybe a little bit realistic, but you can create the reality that you desire by focusing on it consciously, and then subconsciously you'll be taking actions that further your goal.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not only will you be interacting with your reality in a way that is going to further those goals, but also the things that come into your reality, like what is deciding those random things that come into your reality, that person that it happens to be coming by, or we encounter billions of chance things, and so it's almost like the universe just creates this special concoction of putting the right thing into your space at the right times that you can then engage with to be able to get that thing. And the number one step to getting that is to believe it. It's like, if you believe that it can happen, it happens. And if you don't believe, if you believe it can't happen, you're also right. And then, I mean, that's a beautiful, like, self-fulfilling aspect of this whole wild trip we're on. It's like, if you believe that that's crazy and that would never happen to you, congratulations. That's why it never happens to you. So you could you can bring anything you want into your reality. You have to. What I'm beginning to realize also is that a lot of people don't stick to it, because what will happen is that we experience the echoes of a previously desired reality once we make that new change. Like, okay, now I want this new thing, and then from there, it's not like it just suddenly changes. We get these echoes of our previous realities that we kind of have to work through while the new one is taking shape. You know, now,
What do you mean
this,
by that?
like let's say I want to create a 30,000 acre ranch, but before I do that, I have to kind of close out this smaller ranch that I have now that I created as a uh, 3 years ago. Let's say I'm trying to create a bigger enterprise now here in Texas, but I still have to go move cows on the small ranch that I have here. That was my step in that direction. So I'm going to have echoes of all of these previous creations that I wanted, and that I set in motion a long time ago. you know so somewhere along the line, those things are still manifesting, those things are still materializing, coming into this physical reality. And then suddenly, somewhere along the lines, I'm like, "Ooh, I want to pivot and I want to create something bigger." And then, but I'm still going to be getting the results of those previous materialization, those previous thoughts that have went out into the universe and that are coming and manifesting now. And a lot of times, those echoes are going to be in opposition to the new things we're trying to create. So I've learned that it's just a matter of pushing through, holding that new vision very tightly, and then allowing those old echoes to kind of go down and down and down and down and down. And eventually they totally settle out, and you're on your way to your new thing. And then you're eventually going to get there. You're going to pivot, and then those echoes are going to, you know, basically get in the way of the new thing that you're trying to create. So there's like I quantified it actually when I started thinking back about my life. There's like a 6-month echo period where you got to get through the previous creations while, like, the new recipe is, being brewed. And then you start to slowly see that come into fruition as the old one kind of diminishes. And so so that's one of the things that's discouraging to a lot of people. They're like, I want to manifest my reality. And so they write down whatever they was, and what is the first thing you see? The old shit you tried to create. You don't see the new stuff right away. In most cases, you can, and the better you get at it, and the more firmly you believe that this is a real possibility, the more that it's going to actually happen faster for you. But you're definitely going to get the echoes, the leftovers of the previous stuff. I'd be super interested to see how your follower count changed from like 10 minutes ago to right now.
Well, let me write down where we're at here so I could check those analytics later. But yeah, that'll be interesting. Also, not coincidentally, probably a great time to take a pee break because I got to recycle some coffee. So
Nice.
I'll be right back.
Right on. I ask you, Brian, how has your social media game been going?
Um, Probably going better if I put a little more time into it. I just
Yeah.
sometimes it's just difficult for me to do social media. Like, what do I post about? The same things every day. It's like
Right.
I, I, and it's just me. Like it's just all in my head. I'm sure I could be doing better at social media. Have more followers if I posted a lot more often. I just can't always think of shit to post, honestly, or things to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I feel you. Maybe I'm experiencing something similar. I'm just like, I don't know. I don't want to post these videos anymore. Like, I honestly, I think in truth, it's not that cool anymore because everybody is out there posting regenerative shit, and it's become so watered down that it definitely doesn't have the same magic that it did, say, during the pandemic when there were a few of, we've talked about this before, just sort of a few of us hardcore um, obsessives doing it. And then, everybody got in on the game. And I'm just not that excited about it anymore, making making videos in the same context. Maybe I like podcasts. I like doing these podcasts a lot more actually than making short form videos. That's for sure.
Well, the short form video, it doesn't seem like it's quite as popular or as impactful as it was 3 years ago.
Right.
Because 3 years ago, let's be fair, everybody was told to stay home. So what's everybody doing? They're looking at their phones 24/7. Oh, and here's this app that might get banned. Everybody better go check that out. Like in 2020, if Trump had never said anything about banning TikTok, I probably never would have been on it. One of the only reasons I got on the stupid app, it's like the government's going to ban it. Oh, the government's going to ban something. Maybe we should take a look at it because it might be kind of cool. And as it turns out, I met a lot of great connections, and a lot of great connections met a lot of great people. And I think overall it's been a good thing. But what I'm saying is, I think that short video format, it still has its place, but now I think people are waiting for the next big thing. I mean, for a long time it was Facebook. Whatever you did on Facebook, that was cool. You put stuff on Facebook, and now Instagram's the thing. So everybody's posting on Instagram, building followings on Instagram. And now TikTok's the thing. Well, what's the next thing? We haven't found the next thing yet to bring in another group or unlock another group of creators, and for all of us existing guys to go migrate to, so we can try to find new audience there too. So maybe we're just kind of in like the bottom of an innovation cycle in social media, or maybe we're just too fucking old and we've missed it, and it's out there, we just haven't, and we just missed it so far.
Well, one thing that actually occurs to me when you're talking about that is that it reaches this point with short form media where everybody is trying to prove that they have a more nuanced and subtle understanding of what is going on in a 60-second time frame. And so it becomes more and more like, and here's the example. It it goes to, this is, this is what it means to ranch. Oh, well, we have to do regenerative ranching. Oh, regenerative ranching is this. And then it reaches the inevitable one that I saw the other day that I knew was coming, which is there's no such thing as regenerative. Like, it's like this evolution of who has the more subtle, nuanced understanding, so that they can, be the guru, the arbiter of the esoteric, subtle laws and keeper of the scrolls of ranching. And you don't have to do that in a long form. You can just talk because your nuanced understanding of the world will come out in a long form. You don't have to prove in these short, pithy, uh, uh, caricatured, manipulated, curated ways that you have some sort of lock on the universe and you have the new knowledge or whatever, which is something that inevitably we all try to do in that short form. But once you're in long form, you don't have to. You can just say what the way you see the world. And there are so many words that obviously it's going to have very little, hopefully, overlap on the whole with other people, you know. So I mean, that's one of the things that I kind of found was happening, particularly for me. It's just like, okay, I have to make a video about this, and I have to make it in a way that is different from all the other people out there, which means that hopefully I'm trying to engage with it on a deeper level or see some angle of it that nobody has seen. Otherwise, I'm just, making content that has already been made. So the effort is constantly to create something new. And so to create something new in a 60-second form is very difficult. Whereas the interplay between you and me is naturally going to produce something that's unique and that's different. And that's why I certainly like these long form appearances much better than making TikTok videos and Instagram videos, and the constant treadmill of being relevant and being top of mind. And as Gary Vee says, day trading attention. Like, to me, that's just like, oh my God, are you kidding me? Like, we've gotten to the point where we have to out there elbowing to stay in front for people's attention. And I'm glad I did it for that 3-4 year period. And I still make videos sometimes, but luckily I think that I've been able to create the legitimate professional connections that I don't have to, rely completely on social media for credibility anymore, and can have been able to make do some actual real world things that maybe I can ease back off the whole social media thing and allow myself to not feel like I constantly have to be being out there and creating new things.
Yeah, it's a pressure to create new things or present it in a different way. Sometimes I'm just not really original, and I may not have an idea for a video until I see somebody else's, and I'll be like, yeah, I could do that too. And then think, well, I'm just going to be basically ripping off what somebody else did. So I don't make videos a lot. But
now that was a beautiful thing about the first 3 years probably of TikTok, as quote unquote regenerative agriculture was so new and so fresh that nobody was making content about it, and it was shooting fish in a barrel to create content that people hadn't seen before. But now it's mainstream. It's mainstream, and it just ends up arguing between two sub varieties of regenerative agriculture. Like, it's like, it's just I find that it's, and I made a video when I was in Australia. It's like, this is one of the only people that I've seen in Australia doing non-selective grazing, and they're like, people have been doing this since the 70s. Where did you go? You don't know what you're talking about. And it's just like, okay, here we are, fighting amongst ourselves again.
I have to sit here and defend my subjective experience of just a few days in Australia. This was the only place that I went to that I saw that.
Yeah.
Have to defend that to everybody on social media. And that's a lot of the reason why I don't want to post a lot of stuff anymore, is I just get tired of explaining myself. Like, you will spend hours fighting with people in the comments that want to do nothing but troll you over a 60-second video. I have other things to do with life.
Right. I certainly don't. A couple of years ago, I stopped defending myself altogether. I mean, I don't respond to people in the comments, and unless it's something that I can do, that I can say productively. The problem for me is that if there are a lot of comments that are kind of off, that means that maybe I didn't do a good enough job explaining myself. I didn't digest or truncate or synthesize the message effectively enough, and it didn't come across. And then you have to get into arguing about definitions, like, well, there are a lot of people out there doing rotational grazing. Are they doing non-selective grazing? No, but people don't know the difference between the two. And I don't, nobody likes the guy who's just like, well, actually, rotational grazing and non-selective grazing are not the same. Like, nobody likes that guy, and that doesn't do anybody any good. So ultimately, that's why that's why I think the only way forward personally for me is to just buy as much land, find a way to buy as much land as possible and just implement the strategies. That's it. Like I'm I don't want to be an educator. I don't want to be a guru. I don't want to be a consultant forever. I like being a consultant right now. It's good if I have clients that actually care. I like consulting for companies more than I like consulting for individuals. It's a lot more profitable, but and B, they're typically not that they people don't have their own preconceived notions of what needs to happen. So people are a lot more open. It was when I was out on the ranches that people would get into debates with me, and I was just like, I didn't fly 7,000 miles to get in a debate with you guys. Okay, here's the information. Take it if you want it. Leave it if you don't want it. Like, so I mean, ultimately, I do not want to be an educator. Education is not my passion. Okay, I'm definitely not. Hanging out with my kids is my passion. Like at this point in my life, hanging out with my wife and my kids, and being as effective a land manager for as much land as I possibly can, and being so effective eventually that I phase myself out completely from all operations, so that I can just let younger people go out and do the things that I've been doing and just send me a check every month. Like that's the ultimate goal. Like that's where we're shooting for. That's what we're aiming at. Phase myself out so I don't ever have to educate another person. So I don't ever have to move cows anytime I don't want to. I don't have to process cows anytime I don't want to. That's really the ultimate goal. Like I feel like we've had it's been a strong fight over the last 5 years to try to push the industry forward on the social media side, and I'm just kind of coming to terms with the fact that I don't really want to do that anymore. I'm just not that interested in being the social media regenerative warrior that I have been over the last 3, 4, 5 years.
Yeah, and that's fair. Just listening to you talk there the last few seconds, I was thinking of, and I'm not going to name any names, but some of the larger corporate-owned feedlots that have had social media presence over the last couple of years. They don't post a whole lot because they don't have a whole lot to post about. They can't really show a whole lot of what goes on day to day at a feedlot without a whole bunch of people on social media asking uncomfortable questions.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't get a whole lot of feedlot. I think the algorithm knows that I'm
I have to go look for it.
Yeah, it's hard to paint a rosy picture. Things that are completely inharmonious with nature are difficult to depict in a positive way. The human organism knows what beauty is, and there's nothing beautiful about a feedlot. There's nothing beautiful about it. There's nothing beautiful about animals that are designed to eat grass, standing in a dirt lot, being fed high energy feeds. There's nothing beautiful about it. The human organism knows beauty. It knows what the sublime looks like, and it knows that a herd of cows out on grass is a beautiful and sublime thing. And it's very, very easy to make content about that compared to something unnatural like a feedlot. Very easy because it is in line and harmonious with our deep sense of truth and beauty and sublimeness.
It's a good observation. I like it. I like it. So one of the things I kind of want to ask you about is what do you think producers need to know? And what sort of education delivery tools would be effective at delivering that message?
Oh, that's a good one. I think WhatsApp groups are really effective. I mean, I learned a lot from Johan's WhatsApp group. That's really good. Obviously, his book. Um, I think the most effective way to learn something and to get really good at something is to bug the shit out of people who are really good at it until they can't ignore you. And that's what I did with Jaime 3 or 4 years ago. I got Johann's book. I saw his name in the back of it. I read some article or something online where he was, and I just started bugging the shit out of him. And I'm like, yeah, you are not going to get rid of me, bro. And so eventually, we began to form a relationship. I can't really say. I mean, I guess I've gotten a lot of feedback that shows that my Instagram and my TikTok have been helpful to people and have been inspired people. I think that's certainly important. But I think there's just such good information out there right now, particularly but I still haven't found a grazing. If you read How to Win Friends and Influence People and then Man, Cattle, and Veld, like everything you need to be a successful rancher is in those two books, in my opinion. Like, obviously, make sure that you're applying all of the universal principles to your specific circumstances. Like, that's something that you need to do no matter what industry you're in and no matter what's going on in your life. But to me, those two sources, I mean, Johann got kicked off of his land in Zimbabwe in the early 2000s. He needed something to do to pass the time, so he hand wrote this book, and he hand drew all the diagrams, and he collated the pictures that he himself had taken, and it's like this beautiful work that comes from this absolute hell of a period in his life where his beloved ranch and cattle were taken from him. And so he gave this gift of absolute love to the ranching world in the form of that book, Man, Cattle, and Veld. And so I think that was sort of a divine offering to the community. And so I think that there will always be a really special place in the ranching industry for that book, just because of the circumstances from which it came. So that one, and then How to Win Friends and Influence People, super important book. But I find a lot more value in reading books about people than reading books about cattle.
That's fair.
48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. That's a great book.
Every problem is a people problem.
Yeah, every problem is a people problem. Totally true. I mean, if you're out there with your cattle, you can observe and have improvements. And there's infinite number of resources how to ranch better. But interacting with human beings is the ultimate puzzle to solve. And so that's no matter what anybody ever asks me about ranching, I always try to turn it back to those people facing quandaries.
Every problem is a people problem. So what did you have to do to be able to leave for 2 weeks? Do you have somebody come watch the place, move the cows? What'd you do?
Feed hay. I just had my neighbor and my dad fed hay while I was gone. It was actually pretty cool because I thought they were going to be the pasture they were in. I thought they'd have 3 or 4 days worth of forage. And maybe they did only have 3 or 4 days worth of forage, but it took them about a week before apparently they started touching the hay. So, they cleaned that pasture right down. I was very impressed with the harvest efficiency that they got in that pasture. They did lose some condition. Anytime you're not doing it yourself, you're gonna, the results are not going to be exactly what you wanted. But they're back on the upward track now, and you just have to make sacrifices. My family's going to Spain for 2 weeks in January, so we're going to have to do that again.
Your wife's from Spain, isn't she?
Correct. Yeah, she was born in the United States, but her parents are from Spain. So we're going over there, just spend some time with her parents. Moved back because way more affordable over there. Coffee's better too, apparently. So, which is here's another super interesting thing that I think that you might find interesting. Like, my wife and I have this conflict where she is all about the plaza culture and the walkable community and having a great neighborhood with lots of parks for the kids. Very European, right? Very European sensibility, Whereas I grew up surrounded by people who thought the highest and best use of time was to acquire land. Like, this very pioneer, you know, uh, colonial mindset, right? So I'm like, I'm always trying to move into the future in a way that will get us more land, and she's always trying to move into the future in a way that will, allow a better quality of life for the family environment. And I realized that stems from the fact, this is my theory, that, you know, for the last 500 years in Europe, unless you were born in the very, very upper echelon of society, there was 0% chance you were ever going to own any land. So you might as well have a really well-developed community, And so the things that become important are hanging out at the plaza with your homies, the third place culture, going to the bar, having lots of fiestas, having a life that is a lot more geared toward enjoying yourself. Whereas most of us European bred Americans, like, we had to go out and like conquer land and get land. And so it's just imbued in our consciousness that we have to go out and find a spread and acquire more land. And so this tension between her sensibility and my sensibilities have been brought into a new relief, a new focus, because I began to realize that Europeans have a much different sensibility about how to interact with reality.
Okay. So cultural land use sensitivities.
Yeah, well said.
And just trying to summarize what I just heard. So you've got a foot in each world, okay? A wife of Spanish descent that wants that, that more refined European, like, I'm thinking row houses, trees, pedestrian streets, plazas, food carts, people, community,
Right.
right? And, we have this American ideal. We've been kind of talking about it a little bit about, we exert like the exerting dominion over our lands. And granted, that was more of the pioneer thing. And there's a lot of us now that are like, oh, instead of trying to remake this how I think it ought to be, which is a European trait, we want to like maybe try to live in harmony with what's here and try to improve it. And is that a thing of just being in an environment, of a culture being in an environment for a long time? Do they gradually develop awareness of their environment and desire to live in it in more harmony? The other thing you said that was interesting was how the observation, like the peasantry in Europe, like unless you were in the top 1.5%, you were never going to own land, but you still might be able to go out and steward land and work with livestock. I'm sure that, those kind of cases existed, but, and I can see the attraction of living, in a small community with houses kind of close together, as long as there's some green space and a community centered on food. That's what I was really thinking about when you were talking, is describing your wife's kind of ideal. Is like, man, that would be pretty cool to have a community like that. But then I get up and I walk 10 minutes out of town to the field where my livestock are, and I get to move my livestock around with hot wire or whatever. And then I walk back to town because I have the rest of the day and I get to enjoy the rest of the day with my family.
Do you live, is it 10 minutes outside of town? Is that what you're saying? Or is this a hypothetical?
Hypothetical.
Oh yeah. And that would ultimately be, a super cool goal, right? If you had a economically viable patch of land that immediately or was close bordered to a community that had those traits, that would be certainly super cool. But it's like so it's almost like it's kicked off this sense of wrestling with who I am, like going back to this idea of um the non calcified identity. And so who are you? And um like, well, I mean, I'm fifth generation rancher, and then you think of the Thoreau line, like, and I'll change it. He says farms, but I'll say ranches. Ranches are far more easily gotten than gotten rid of. It's like once you're in it, you're kind of stuck. It's to some degree. I'll always like even if we do end up getting some house in a walkable community somewhere, which would probably not be the United States, because we don't really have those that much. I would always be just lusting for some land to steward, as you said, to some land to because yeah, like we want to live in we're transitioning into this period where we want to live in more harmony with the environment. But since we live in this current system, you got to buy it first, or you got to lease it or control it in some way before you can then go live in harmony with it or establish your sense of harmony over the top of it. So I'm just and so the only way really to create some sort of balance with that is just like this hyper capitalistic sense of, well, you got to have a house in town and some land outside of town and then fly your airplane from one to the other. Like there's one solution that a lot of ranchers have had for a long time, the last 100 years. But people in the Texas Panhandle did that for forever. It's in All the Pretty Horses by Cormac McCarthy, and the
Let's
What now?
Let's be honest. If you could commute to work on your ranch in an airplane or helicopter, you'd do it.
Oh yeah, totally, absolutely. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm saying that it's just fascinating that that's the only way I can sort of come up with the ultimate balancing of those two drives, of those two desires. Aside from having because that's one of the interesting things, right? I mean, it's like, imagine you have this real community, let's say, I don't know, 1,000, 1,500 people, and then you have a big chunk of land that's immediately bordering this community. Then you're the rich asshole, right? That has that big piece of land that all of these other people who live in town don't have, and so it creates all of these, interesting political thing. I mean, that's what's been happening since the beginning of time. So I guess just choose your problem set, right?
Well said. Well said. I need to get going. What do you want to end with, bud?
Oh, I don't know, man. That's just there's no ending with us. There's just until next time, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, we could talk about what's going on in Ukraine and Israel and SpaceX.
Oh, I'm not touching Israel, dude. I'm not touching that subject. No.
Come on, I thought you had a degree in international relations or political science.
Yeah, I know enough about that to just know that there's no opinion that you could have that would benefit anybody in the short term or the long term. I have nothing interesting or intelligent to say about that situation. It's horrible for everybody involved.
I would probably tend to agree with you that that's the safest stance to take on the whole Israel Mideast situation. Look, it's too complicated. There's things going back there 4,000 years of history, conflicting claims, and kind of like I've been saying lately. I ranch in Barber County, Kansas, on stolen Comanche land, and they stole it from somebody else. So do we just give it back to the people we stole it from, or the people they stole it from, or the people that those people stole it from? Who's right and who's wrong? And if we live in the past like that, we'll never move forward, I guess is what I would say. And it sounds easy to say it, but people got to learn how to get along on this planet and learn how to live on it together.
Seems like a good idea to me. I think that's what we're all trying to do, man. I think that's what we're all trying to do. Just keep some food on the table. Enjoy this hallucination until it's over, and then hopefully not leave too big of a mess when we check out.
Good stuff. I think that's a great place to end. Hobbs, my man, I appreciate your brain. I appreciate your conversation, and you always make me think.
Right on, Brian. Same here, man. Real pleasure, as usual.
All right, gang. Have a great week.